Okay, so we're live. So welcome to the Node.js Community Benchmarking Working Group meeting for September 18th, 2018. We're going to go through our standard agenda with a number of things tagged for discussion today. Just a sec, I'm just looking at why the stream didn't start. Oh, yeah, okay, it started. That's good. Okay, so first of all, does anybody have any announcements this week? Okay, no announcements this week. Okay, so then going for the issues that are tagged on the agenda, there's one that actually isn't tagged for the agenda, but that is, and I'm just going to start with that one because it will be quick. It's issue 235, the membership review. So it looks like, you know, I opened the issue originally August 2nd, and I reminded people 21 days ago. So at this point, I'm going to, unless anybody objects, I'm going to open a PR moving people who haven't responded to Emeritus. That makes sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next issue, which is 239. I think, David, you marked this one. This is Nodeland in the thread pool. So you want to start the discussion there?
Sure. My name is Jamie. My last name is Davis.
Sorry. Okay.
Confusion.
Jamie. Yep.
Okay. So hi, I'm a researcher from Virginia Tech. I study Node.js stuff. Item number 239 is a request to discuss the potential optimization I've been working on, which is changing how the Node.js thread pool works. The current thread pool design puts there's a V8 node. So Node.js defines a node platform, which is where the V8 worker threads sit, and then everything else is routed to libuv. That includes file system IO, DNS requests, crypto, and the compression library Zeeland. And in principle, putting file system IO, network IO with DNS and two different types of compute in the same pool is probably a bad idea. And there have been a number of issues over the years with various community members complaining about this and wishing it were slightly different. The most naive thing to do is to take all the compute stuff and put it in one pool and take all the IO stuff and put it in a different pool, and then that should improve pretty much everybody's life. So I have implemented this. That involves hacking in libuv a bit so that there's now a concept of a pluggable thread pool like V8 has, but for libuv. And I've got a prototype implementation of that in Nodeland. And I'm currently trying to figure out if it improves workloads. So I've run all the Node.js benchmarking workloads, and I can tell you something interesting you may or may not know. The Node.js benchmarking workloads don't use the thread pool for anything other than file system IO.
Right. So you mean the ones that were running nightly?
Yeah. So
right. Yep.
NoDC, SSR, NoDC, EIS, Acme Air, and the web tooling benchmarks, which I think are all the like big ones you've got.
Yeah, because that makes some sense to me in that I don't know of where we'd be using too much DNS unless it was like the reverse DNS lookup kind of thing. Is that?
So NodeDC, EIS, and SSR, and maybe Acme Air all make one DNS query, which is, I think, I don't know what it's doing, maybe talking to MongoDB or something.
That is it.
And then they do a little bit of compute, which I think is probably uncompressing something. And then in their steady state runs, they just read stuff off the file system, probably static web pages, if I had to guess.
For the NodeDC, it does mainly MongoDB operations. Doesn't do file system IO.
Yeah, so I forget, I have a list somewhere, but one of them doesn't use basically the thread pool for anything. It just asks MongoDB stuff. Another one actually does use the thread pool while handling requests, serving web pages or something. I'm not really sure. So my question for you guys is that representative of Node.js use in the wild, does nobody use the thread pool for user-defined compute or cryptography or compression? Like we have those APIs in Node Core. So do people use them? Do you have any clue?
I personally don't have a good answer to that. I mean, these are the best representations we've come up so far. And we'd like them to be reflective of the real world, but in terms of actually knowing that they are, that's still an open question. So, I mean, in terms of using the thread pool, this would, what are the Node APIs like? So doing DNS requests, for example, I could see, is a case where people would want to authenticate who's connecting to them, and they would do a DNS request to, for logging or whatever, like a reverse request. Is that something that would drive use of the thread pool?
If they were issuing DNS requests, yes. I don't know if that's a thing people commonly do.
Right. Okay. I'm just trying to think where in your typical web type serving a bunch of requests when you would actually need to do the DNS request. That's kind of one I could think of.
So on the DNS topic, there's apparently enough use out there that Anna Henningsson, is that her name?
Yeah.
Okay. She put DNS throttling into the pool a couple months ago, so that now no more than half of the pool can be occupied doing DNS stuff.
Right.
So there's some workload out there that is putting enough DNS requests out that was leading to thread pool over usage.
I can certainly see that's where you're the client. Like if you're making outgoing requests and you need to figure out.
Well then,
sure. So that's an obvious one. Now that I suspect is not covered by our existing benchmarks. Right? Like sorry, go ahead.
Microservices mode would be an example of that. When you have a bunch of node services talking to each other, acting.
That would use DNS a lot. Yeah.
So the Node.js does have a mode where you can run that in a microservices.
Okay.
It's the same application, just divided into like 5 or 6 services.
Okay, I have not tried that one.
Yeah, but it is not part of our nightly testing for sure. But the Node.js's GitHub page, NodeDC's GitHub page does have that description.
Okay. Have you run that, and do you know if it works?
Yeah, it works. We have tried it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Udem's one of the authors of that benchmark suite. So.
Okay. Well, I will give that a try and see if that changes the workloads you've got right now. And if it does, then maybe we should add that to the.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess the other one you mentioned was crypto, right?
So crypto and compression and anything else the NAPI. Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, NAPI. We didn't like NAPI.
Yeah, I didn't like that either.
And that's why it's the pushes. Yeah, make it NAPI.
Yeah, so NAPI exposes the ability to submit user-defined work to the pool as well.
Yep.
Not clear what people use it for, but.
Well, it's any time you want to go off and like you get a request. If it's going to take you some time to compute it, you obviously don't want to do it on that main thread. So it's so that you can then do it asynchronously, and when it's complete, make the callback.
So I understand what it's for.
Yeah.
I don't understand if people use it.
The answer, I'm sure, is yes, because we inherited that because it was part of NAN, and so it's Sure. But I haven't done the survey of what modules use it and what modules don't, so I don't have a ready handle. But I'm sure a search, like some sort of crawler, could probably crawl through the existing modules and look for the class from NAN in particular.
I am in the process of doing that.
Okay, so that would give it. I mean, we'd be interested in having that list just for NAPI as well. So
yeah.
Yeah, currently more typical Node application doesn't use crypto on libuv thread. I think they use it on the main thread, right? For any of the login or registration services they use using the Express framework, I don't think they explicitly use libuv thread.
Are they using the Node crypto API?
Yeah, there are some of the application does use Node Crypto API.
Yeah, because that'll use the libuv under the hood if it's asynchronous.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think you use that crypto API directly if you're just doing standard HTTPS. So if you're taking requests, doing authentication, so you'd have to be like and I'm not sure which ones you're talking about, but if it's like to do bulk data encryption, it would be something different than a regular, hey, come on, I've got a request and I'm going to send you a response and it's HTTPS protected.
It might change with HTTP 2, right? It works on HTTPS. Doesn't that use Node Crypto API?
HTTP 2, I mean, most of the implementation of that is at the C layer. So I don't think that would be going back into the Node APIs necessarily to do the crypto.
Okay.
It basically wraps, I think it's ng-HTTP 2, which is a C++ level implementation.
I mean, would that route into the Node crypto library C++ implementation, or is it?
I don't, Mike. My first guess is no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more like there was a standalone HTTP2 implementation you could basically use as a library, and we've incorporated that library into Node and wrapped it. And so the compression one's also an interesting one. Like that's one where we've considered, and I know other people have considered compression accelerators. So forgetting just that you might want to do it on a separate thread, you might even want to do it in like accelerated hardware and stuff like that. Yeah. Unfortunately, I never got to the point where I had somebody who could actually do enough work or had enough time to like build, here's the list of use cases where you really want to do that and get really good gains, right? But it kind of sounds like that's the kind of thing you're looking for in this context, right?
Less about hardware acceleration and more about if they're using it at all, right?
Right, but if where would you want to use it? Because
sure, if you know where people are using it, you can then answer that second question.
You can answer the first question is like, does the thread pool help? And if the answer is the thread pool does help, then it might even be the case that hardware would help.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I was just saying that so that if you're doing a crawl to find those in addition to the other ones, that's also a very interesting piece of information.
Okay.
Because again, we might find some really good use cases there, and if there's a great one for compression, we should have something like that in our nightly builds potentially as well.
This might be off topic a little bit, but I did enable Intel's DPDK accelerator with Node.js. It is not, I did not propose the change yet. It is on just my repo. So that does provide, as part of not only the network accelerator, but does provide the compression and the cryptography, some hardware support enabled through DPDK layer.
Mm-hmm. How was that integrated? Like, did you replace the Zlib, or do you what? Yeah, I'm interested.
So right now I'm not taking advantage of in the Zlib or crypto. I'm just right now enabled only for the networking part. What I had to do to use DPDK was I had to integrate with some user space TCP stack. There's a project called MTCP, is out of the South Korea university, and I took that, I integrated that with DPDK, and then used that stack integrated with the Node.js, which bypasses the whole kernel networking stack.
Yeah.
So that gives a very good gain, around 4x in certain cases. But what I'm trying to say that layer, the DPDK layer, does provide accelerator for the compression as well as the cryptography, some of the crypto instructions within Intel hardware. So if this can show and get accepted, then that can use to enable the hardware acceleration into crypto and Zeeland. Yeah.
Right. And I guess it's too bad. There was a discussion last week, and I'm just finding the minutes here. Or sorry, not last week, but last meeting. Was that 7:31? Sec, I'm just looking for the right one. I think that may be the last one. But basically, there's a couple people from, oh, geez. No, sorry. Actually, where are those? Maybe they haven't landed yet. Hold on. Let me just find it. Pull requests. Right, August 28th.
What was it about?
So we had Rip Sohan and Oliver Black, and they are from and so I have it in my email somewhere. I didn't get it in minutes, but they're basically from a company that does network acceleration as well.
Okay.
And as part of the work they were doing, they were already planning to build some benchmarks to measure that. And they were kind of saying, well, like, would it be useful to collaborate so that we could get those benchmarks into the nightly builds, as they would be covering, network related things. So they were going to actually go off and try and write some benchmarks or find some benchmarks to do that stuff.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I don't see the issue in the repo. The next step is they were going to go and open an issue.
Yeah, I just use a NoDC, Acme Air, and a couple of microservices benchmark I have internally.
Right. And I'd certainly mentioned that they should get in touch with you in terms of, potentially reusing Acme, the Node.js as the framework to be able to add in some new benchmarks as well.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess we'll have to, I don't see anything since then, so we'll need to follow up with them to see where they're at. That was just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so the DPDK work is interesting. There's only problem for that too as a proposal. It's not very user-friendly. The way you start the runtime, normally people just do node app.js and it just works. But DPDK has very involved settings. So that's one of the reason I'm kind of hesitant, and I did propose it it's on my repo. I think Rod Wag was looking at it, and a couple other people were looking at it, how feasible that would be to include. I can enable with the configure as a build option, so people have an option to at least build it and test it. But I don't know how it would be received how that would be received by the community.
Right. Yeah.
Should I just propose it and see what happens, Mike?
I mean, opening something to start the discussion is always a good first step, right? Like, explain the reason, what it looks like, and, I guess it comes down to what kind of changes are needed, right? Like I guess you were saying like one is to add in an API where you can plug in, I guess that's what Jamie was talking about, was like an API. So I can see, for me, it's easier if you're adding an API that lets people do new things.
Mm-hmm.
If it's like changes that are very specific to one hardware implementation or one platform or something like that, that might be a little bit more of a sell, right?
Yeah, so the DPDK itself is not very IS specific, right? It works on all sorts of platforms.
Right.
The MTCP layer is just a C code. It is very portable code.
Right.
So only change I needed was like 4-line change in the libuv. That because of the syscall interface, and I proposed a change. I submitted a patch to libuv, but I believe there was a work going on to just even get rid of the whole syscall API and use accept and accept for all these calls directly.
Yeah,
right.
I saw that PR.
Yeah, so if that happens, then then my patch is not even required.
Okay.
And this change, the integration it used to be when I started last year, it was like around 300 to 400 lines of code in Node.js main function.
Right.
Now I worked with MTCP almost a whole year, and we got it down to 3 lines now.
Right.
Just make one call just to initialize the stack, and that's it. And it just works. So maybe I will just propose it, I guess.
But if that one call, is it, when you say initialize the stack, it's initializing something that you may or may not have?
So you have to basically build with those libraries. So the configure, I added configure options. Hey, build with MTCP and the DPDK library. If it's not there, then of course that's not going to get used. But if it's there, it will link, and then the first call in the main you do is, hey, go initialize the MTCP stack.
Right. And so like, if I was trying to get that in, my angle would be like, can you have something where you have a shared library built?
Mm-hmm.
And what you add into libuv is basically a call out where you can do whatever, right? Like, and that call out, I don't know, you can, so it's basically that, it's not tied just to this usage. There's other places where you might want to plug something in. And if you need to do initialization, you could also add, your implementation of a function, and now it can do that for something else too.
Oh, I see.
That kind of approach, you could make a broader case for, well, this is something that's good for this, but it's also good for other things. It doesn't have like a dependency. It's better in my mind in terms of like, if you don't have to build with a hard dependency on pieces, it's also like you've already then, if that gets into Node Core and you've got binaries already out there that somebody can say, drop a shared library into. And now your DPTK stuff works without having to say, oh, well, you're going to have to rebuild it on your own. And
yeah. Well, everything in our Node.js build right now, everything is statically linked anyway, right? Even V8 is statically linked and libuv is statically linked. So I basically built the static version of DPDK and MTCP.
Right.
So they are also statically linked for this purpose.
Yeah, it's like, so, I mean, I just, when I was thinking about, say, we were looking at zlib compression, what the thought was to suggest that you could basically start it up, say, with a command line option that says, here's the name of the dynamic zlib implementation I want you to use. If that doesn't exist, just fall back to the static one, right? But if it does exist, then dynamically link it and make all the calls to the methods in that shared library as opposed to the internal ones. And that, because my concern is always like, how do you make it so that people can actually use it, right? And if it's like build your own node, that's a much higher bar than take the existing node. And now I don't know for like DPDK, what else you have to, like, what other integration points you need versus just the initialization. I'm guessing there's more than just that, right?
No, there's just the initialization.
So you just basically need to run one method call on startup?
Yep. Just say init MTCP and
right.
That's it. Only thing is the condition is it has to be done way, way early in the main function. So normally I do it, I think in the platform init, I just added that call.
Right.
What happens is internally it kind of intercepts accept all the BSD socket API. So that's why it doesn't need anything else. It just needs initialization.
Well, that's where I would. Now you might get some security concerns.
Yeah.
I would think a generic command line option that says, here's the name of a shared library, and it's going to run an entry point in that shared library on startup would be something that's not tied to DPTK in any way. That shared library could then, be linked against DPTK. You drop that in, you run it with the command line option, and now you get your initialization. But the next time somebody needs to do something similar, they can reuse the same mechanism just by building a shared library and running with that command line option.
I mean, it can be done. I can work with MTCP. I know them very well. I can work and see if that is possible. So it could be just as an environment variable,
right,
and enable that. So yeah, I can try that. I think that is workable.
Yeah, it just seemed, and then you can use it with the binaries that are already shipping.
Right.
Which is the real win in my mind. Now, there might be some concerns over, well, does this command line option, like running some shared library which could be tampered with or whatever, is there going to be some sort of concern? So thinking through that makes sense. But otherwise, yeah, that would be I think a good way to do it. And it wouldn't necessarily, because you were talking about changes, maybe it wasn't. It just needs to run at startup. It doesn't need to be tied to libuv at all, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Yeah. So, but the point was that so that DPDK has this accelerators for zlib and crypto. We can take advantage of if this gets enabled.
Right. Okay. And I guess related is, it would be good to have benchmarks which covers that kind of stuff, because then you could show the benefit of using the accelerator, similarly, or for using the thread pool, and similarly, we don't want to regress those kind of things anyway, because they're probably important use cases, right?
So on the topic of use cases, my current plan to find use cases is crawl npm and then crawl GitHub, looking for Node applications that use npm modules that use the thread pool. And also to ask around at Node.js Interactive this October. Do you guys know of some giant list of Node.js applications that are open source that I can go look at as a way to kind of get a sample?
The one thing that comes to mind is I know the foundation has got the showcase where they basically ask people to showcase things they've built with Node.js.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to be a great match with what you're looking for, but it's a list of things.
Are they open source things?
To be honest, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'm guessing, I don't know. Yeah,
okay, well,
don't have a good answer, but I don't think it's so long a list that it's not worth taking a look at.
Sure.
So I use some. There is a Node.js measurement. There is a one GitHub repo which has combination of, I think, around 6 different applications, all open source. We use it like there's a Let's Chat, there is a To-Do app. There are 4 more, and I have a list of those. Maybe I can send it. I can upload to this document.
Yeah, if you can put in the Google Doc, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's like a connection of cool Node.js projects or something?
Yeah, so the Let's Chat I mentioned because it uses the token in order for every request. So there might be something to do with there is a crypto API it uses.
Yeah.
So that could be a good use case to experiment with.
Okay.
What was that list again? It was.
So it's a Let's Chat app. There is a To-Do app. There is a.
I didn't mean which ones there were, but like, it's a list you use internally, or is it what?
Yeah, so we use just to try it out what other workflows we can, and they are all open source.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I believe there was somebody from UT Austin, group of PhD students wrote a paper on that as well.
It's the 6 from the micro paper?
Yeah, 6 from the micro paper. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll throw a link to that in.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah. Thanks. Although I don't think that list was generated in any careful way.
Yeah. The benchmarks you have to. I had to redo some of the settings they did in those apps. There were some problems, but they're good. The Let's Chat especially, it was a very backend bound, very CPU intensive, because it used that one of those crypto APIs.
Yeah. Okay. And last question from my side. So suppose I go out and find that people have a bunch of workloads that aren't represented by the Node.js benchmarking suite. How do we get new ones into this suite?
Open an issue saying, hey, here are the ones we should add. There's, we've always, the whole strategy is to say, here's our matrix. If we're missing like use cases in terms of what we think is important, we should add it to that matrix. But it's always been fill in the gaps in that matrix. So it's like, yeah, the answer is you come up with good benchmarks, we want to take them. What we need to do to get them running nightly is basically, ideally, a PR which pulls in the pieces you need and a shell script that will run the benchmark, printing out the result you want to have graphed to the console. And then along with that, it's basically you add a couple of JSON files, which basically say, how are we going to name this? Which different versions of Node are we going to actually generate graphing for? Basically, it's a couple files which are pretty easy to put together, which will then generate the graphs that get shown.
Yeah.
And then we just need to we have like 4 or 5 jobs in the CI where we would need to add in like the 2 or 3 lines that say, here's the ID for the benchmark, here's the command line to actually run that shell script. And, then it parses out the results and publishes it to the database. So usually what happens is, if you open an issue that says, here's the PR that lands the stuff to run it and generates the config files we need for the graphing, then I can go in and add them to the jobs, like the 2 or 3 lines to the jobs that actually run every night. And then that stitches everything together to have the results being graphed.
Is there a way for me to test such a PR?
In terms of running the shell script, you should be able to just clone the benchmarking repo and run the shell script. So for example, if you have dependencies like a client generator, everything should be in there. The script should actually pin all those to the right CPUs, and it should just pop out the results on the command line.
Okay.
In terms of testing the graph generation, you could do that. You'd have to, like, everything's in the repo. You could clone it and sort of set up your own environment to run all those things.
Yeah.
They're pretty simple though. So generally, you'll get something that's close enough, and when we land it, we can fix that up. I still have to get Udom access so that he could start helping with some of that too. But that's usually not a very big piece of the work.
Okay. I may open a PR that says, I don't know what to do.
Sure.
And you can help me with that later.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, like the real work is getting it to the point where you clone the benchmarking repo, you say, run this command, this shell script, and it pops out the results. Once you have that, the rest is pretty simple. So
does the shell script need to have, does the shell script install all the dependencies for the workload you're running, or do you put the workload, the server code into the repo itself? I assume it's the first one.
If their licenses and everything is good, ideally it would just be something that's in, if you want to run, say, some script node code, it would be better if that code is actually committed into the benchmarking repo itself.
Okay.
In some cases, like if we're running third-party benchmarks, that doesn't make as much sense. So they do Git clones of other repos to make that stuff available.
Yeah, and I've seen some Git clone followed by a Git checkout to make sure it's the right version and so on.
Exactly, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what we have today isn't perfectly that. So like, for example, on Acme Air, we do have 1 or 2 things installed on the machine, but we want to avoid that unless absolutely necessary, because that makes it harder for other people to run it and all those things. So if it can just be a clone run and it handles everything you need to do, that's where we want to get to.
Okay. Good. Well, I think that's enough to get me started anyway.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll let you know what I find from my crawl.
Yeah, no, that would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, so I may send you some preliminary results from the top 1,000 NPM modules, and then you can tell me more or less information that would be useful to you in your various roles.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if you just open an issue that says, here's what I found so far, because that way it'll be then documented in a place we can find later. And if other people are sort of keeping an eye on it, they'll see it too and all that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That's
okay.
Plenty of help for me, so I appreciate that.
Great. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. So yeah, we'll be interested to see what you discover, and happy to add benchmarks if you can help find them. And
sure. Yeah, and this is partly self-serving, right? Because if there's no benchmark that shows that my thing is good, then why would we merge my thing?
Well, understood. Yep. Yeah. But it's also good for us because, if we have these things and the next time somebody comes up with something that's potentially valuable, if we can easily figure out that it is, that's better for the project.
Yeah, it's good for everyone.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that wraps up this item on the agenda.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll move on to the next one. The next one is investigate the time taken, number of benchmarks in core 225. Unfortunately, we don't have Gareth today who was looking at that, so I think we'll skip discussion unless Udom, you have anything on that front?
No, I mean, I tried on our internally, and it takes really long time if you think about all the benchmarks.
Yeah.
It just takes really long time for sure. Unless we narrow down a list, certain important one. It will go more than 24 hours for sure.
Right. That's been our challenge, is like, there's so many tests in there. We need some subset that provides useful data on its own, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, not all of them are performance though. That there are a lot of functional tests. We can figure it out, the functional from the performance. Then we may be able to trim down quite a bit.
Right. Really, I thought the benchmark ones were all around performance versus, like, the functional ones are the ones we run in the regular suite. And then when you say make benchmark, those were at least intended to be more around performance.
Yeah, there are some of them are so small, they're just really, really tiny time.
Right. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. So I guess Garrett's volunteered to continue to look at that. So when we see him next time, we'll continue on. The next one is require cache perf much lower, so 202. And I guess the real thing is I have to still work with Udemy to figure out why you can't access the benchmarking machine to figure that out.
Yeah, I think I have problem connecting from my Intel network. I guess
Right.
from the office I cannot connect to that machine.
Right.
But I think outside office, I think I tried. I was able to connect.
Okay, but I can't really change that, I don't think.
Yeah. No.
I suspect that that's not a Node machine.
Yeah,
probably not.
I don't know how.
Right?
I don't understand how it is preventing, but anyway, I think that's what the problem is. So I think I'll take a look at that. I believe I tried it from my home network and it worked.
Okay, so I guess at that point, I'll wait for you to let me know if you need more help. Like,
only thing that email does not have the password for my account, so you can.
There's no password. You sent me an SSH key.
Yeah, it asked me the password. It does not.
Right. So in that case, I didn't get your key right. So after this meeting, we'll make sure, because I often get a typo or whatever in my cut and paste. So that would.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next one, and then after the meeting's over, we'll stick together and figure that part out. Okay. Add ghost workload to benchmarking. I think that was your next thing afterwards, or
yeah. So one thing I did was because of the team changes internally, I lost 2 of my colleagues. So myself, I'm doing multiple things, but I was able to run the Ghost.js. Only thing I wasn't able to get the MySQL run in Docker. Once I figured that out, then I'm ready to kind of upstream it. Put it to the benchmark.
Great. I would like that.
Yeah.
I can let you know if it uses a thread pool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've looked at that. There's like a benchmark repo for Ghost that has like weird levels of support for Node.
Yes, there's been a bunch of discussion about some version works on some version of Node, the other one doesn't work on the other one.
So sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna try it, but then I looked at that and was like, I don't think I want to try this right now.
No, it does not work with anything non-LTS version. That's the problem.
Okay.
So there is an option. There used to be an option called node check version equal to false, and then it would work. But that's very flaky. Somehow it just works sometimes doesn't work. And now I think if you git clone today, your Ghost repo, you'll see that option is not even there. So and the problem with not only the Ghost, all the npm dependencies, they use particular version of Node.
Yeah.
So even if you fix it in Ghost application, the other modules may not work with your latest Node. So that's kind of ongoing problem. So I don't know how would we test it for the master version of Node, right? That's one of the challenge. That's question for Mike.
So if it doesn't run for master,
you have to hack it basically. So that typically means changes to the workload. Right.
Yeah, we have done things in the past where we have a job that if I think our jobs still do, they still compile Node. I mean, we could apply patches on top of those. So we, that's kind of messy, but if it requires a patch that says, okay, this is no longer, if it needs to be an actual regular release or something, we could apply a patch that fixes those kinds of things.
Okay. Yeah, well, let me figure this out. This is Docker, MySQL and Docker, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what difference the Ghost workload has relative to the existing macro benchmarks you're running?
So one thing is it uses MySQL, not the MongoDB. The Acmere and NoDC use MongoDB. That's one thing. The second is it also has user ID password kind of functionality.
Okay.
And the third is it mainly doesn't do a lot of database operation. It does first time it makes a query, it generates the HTML page. And the idea is that the host Node application doesn't really get used very much. Normally it will be behind Nginx, and the static page will be served by the Nginx server. And
right.
That's how it is designed, at least. And I do see that with the minimum number of concurrency, the core goes to 100% if you run the Node application. It's the Ghost application. So it looks like there is part of it is CPU sensitive.
Okay.
It doesn't do a lot of post operation, does not have any, it is a little different than the NoDC and the Acmere in that sense.
So you're saying would it be running more Node code versus doing queries to external services like the database, or?
That's right. Yeah, at least that's if you read the Ghost documentation, the developers, that's what they recommend. That's what they think. It should not hit so much into the Ghost. It will be served by the Nginx after initial generation. That's at least in production. Yeah, that's my initial read into that Ghost application. And also it has two modes, development and the production. And you have to run in production because the performance is quite a bit different than the development mode, which is by almost 20 to 30% difference. So there are certain things you have to really do to understand the performance and the execution mode of the Ghost.
Okay, so that's the end of our agenda items. Just to see if anybody has questions on the stream. We'll give people 30 seconds or so to post one in there. Otherwise, we'll call it for today. Okay, I don't see any questions. So thanks for everybody for showing up. And yeah, Jamie, we're interested in seeing what kind of data you pull out. And so hopefully we'll see you next time we get together.
I hope to have more data.
Okay.
All right, bye guys.
See you later.
Bye.
Okay, I'm gonna